Hallo Theresa, hallo zusammen.
Hi. So I think we can start. We already many people. So welcome everyone to the webinar, The Environmental and Human Rights Impact of Raw Material Extraction, Lithium in the High Andes in Argentina. The webinar is organized by the NGOs Wetlands International Europe together with both ends and the EU Civil Society Network Raw Materials Coalition. And my name is Theresa Hoffmann. I'm a policy advisor on raw materials and fair trade at the German Development and Relief Agency Brot für die Welt. We are based in Berlin and we are also a member in the Raw Materials Coalition. And I will try to guide us through the session today. The number of registrations shows and how many people now showed up shows how important and of interest the topics we want to discuss today are for many and also diverse stakeholders. And yeah, thus I'm very happy that we have great speakers today with a lot of experience on high Andean wetlands, lithium extraction, and we will also have a look on EU policies today and how this links to lithium extraction and those sensitive ecosystems. So before we start, let me very quickly just mention some house rules for the session. So as you may already have seen on your screen, the webinar will be live on YouTube and it will be recorded. So please, if you don't want to be seen out there in the World Wide Web, switch your camera off and keep it off. And moreover, please, keep your microphone muted, of course, during the whole session in order to avoid interruptions. Now we want to start very briefly with a short Mentimeter. I think most of you are familiar with this. We prepared two questions. So if you want to participate, you should see, yes, you should see, thank you, the link in the chat now, and on YouTube, I guess it is in the commenting area. And so we have one question. What comes into your mind when you hear the words high Andean wetlands? What do you kind of associate with it? This would be the first question. And the second question we prepared is, what do you think, or what do you think are the impacts of lithium extraction on high Andean wetlands? And now I ask Martina to share her screen that we can see very briefly the cloud word we might get.
Sure, 1 second. But I don't have. Yeah, 1 second.
So maybe for the ones who just joined the session, we're doing a Mentimeter. If you want to participate, you can do this via the link in the chat. I will repost it. And in the meantime, we try to show the results. If it doesn't work, no problem. We can also show it later. Just let me know, Martina. Yeah, I think now it works. Yeah, great. So the results are, okay, there are many words like water, biodiversity, nature, cold. That's also good. Salt, indigenous communities, high altitude. I think, yeah, all the many geographical circumstances you face there. So I think there's already a lot of knowledge about it. And maybe we can go to the second question. What do you think are the impacts of lithium extraction on wetlands? So yeah, as you can see, water scarcity, hydric stress, water quantity, human rights violations. So yeah, this is just to get a quick idea. Thanks a lot. But now we want to start, want to start with the inputs, and we want to see what actually our experts tell us about high Andean wetlands and lithium extraction. So I want to present Roman Baygun. He's the program manager of Wetlands International's Saving High Andean Wetlands for People in Nature program, quite a program actually, from the Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, based in Buenos Aires. And Roman has a degree in biological sciences at the University of Buenos Aires and a postgraduate diploma in natural resources from the Curtin University of Technology in Australia. And before Wetlands International, he worked for many years also for the Ministry of Environment of Argentina. And Roman, in a few days, there will be the World Wetlands Day, and it will be celebrated. And this year, there will be a spotlight on how all aspects of human, or many aspects of human well-being, are tied to the health of the world's wetlands and vice versa. So how healthy and well-managed wetlands play a crucial role in human well-being. And according to the Ramsar Convention, wetlands hold and provide most of our fresh water. And due to this and also many other characteristics, they're very important, and also they're very sensitive ecosystems. And most of the lithium reserves in Argentina are located in the high Andean wetlands, where water is already scarce due to geographical circumstances and also impacts of climate change. And lithium, as we all know, is an important mineral used for the military sector, digitization, and by 2030, around 90% of its use will probably go to batteries for the car industry. So, Roman, could you please share with us, your insights, your experience, what are actually high Andean wetlands, and also about the environmental impact on them due to lithium extraction? You have the floor.
Thank you, Therese. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Let me share with you first the screen, and you tell me when it is
We can see it. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. This presentation was prepared together with Cecilia Goburu and Patricia Marconi, who are part of our program. Today I want to address that we know we are in a climate crisis. We are traversing this climate crisis, and we agree all that we need a strategic transition into the renewable energy and emerging electric vehicles technologies that demand the lithium. You can see that the lithium sees the fastest growth in mineral demand, such as for the Paris Agreement, it will grow 40 times in 20 years approximately. You can see it on the left. And these resources, which are estimated to be around 518 million tons in the world, have a concentration, the red square, rectangle, sorry, it's Argentina with 21 approximately % of the resources, and we already have 48 lithium projects and growing, okay? So this lithium, not just coincidentally, just by chance, but it appears to be easier to find in the so-called lithium triangle. And it's where 58% of the lithium reserves are located in a form of brine. This is like a very, very salted liquid that it's underneath the salt flats in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, above the 3,000 meters above the sea level. And this coincides very much with the Ramsar sites that are very important internationally in terms of conservation. And this is because of the very peculiar characteristics these endorheic basins have. They support 22 priority sites of the network of wetlands of importance for the conservation of High Andean flamingos, which have a certain degree of threatened to the populations, and only 15 of these are protected areas. So what is the lithium mining in the area? Well, today approximately 690,000 tons of lithium are being demanded from the area, and in the lithium triangle, the lithium brine is pumped up to the surface and then evaporated in these ponds you can see on the left to concentrate the lithium carbonate after that. And only one example, in Salar del Hombre Muerto in Catamarca in Argentina, this has a surface of 93,000 football fields, just one intervention, one company. And okay, so in this area, this is a very dry area, very harsh to live. And this is because there's a high water deficit. This means that more water evaporates naturally than it falls. It only precipitates around the basin, not in the center. And this is where the wetlands are located. And the vegetation which can live in this area only is developed thanks to the connection of the roots to the welling groundwater, which is coming from underneath, okay? So as you can imagine, these wetlands are located in very, very particular places, not everywhere. So they are sources of life. We say they act as oases. These wetlands and salt flats are included into these wetlands, provide essential resources for human activity and habitat, which is highly adapted to these environments. And so obviously there will be high levels of endemic species, and between these salt flats or wetlands, the Andean and Puna flamingos, for example, move because they're vagrant. They need to use a microscopic algae that bloom very, very wide in a very wide distribution. Okay. So which are the impacts that we find after the extraction? You have to think that this is water mega mining. This is 1 ton of lithium. It's only obtained after evaporating out of the system 2 million liters of water that will never return to the system, okay? Only the installations of the companies modify the surface hydrodynamics because, as we say, they're very flat areas. So anything that you put in between the wet area and the surroundings will change the hydrodynamics. And this extraction, which is pumped from the middle, lowers the water table all around the basin. So this impacts in wetlands, drying vegas. So the black color you see on the photo is not natural. That's a dry vega. already impacted in Catamarca province. So this, of course, affects wildlife who lives there. And also in these ponds, you will find, after the evaporation, exposed harmful salts which belong to the depths, not to the surface, which is a toxic waste accumulation. Also, the pipes pollute the freshwater reserves by salting it. And the problem is that we think that there's not enough hydrologic nor cumulative environmental impact assessment adapted to these very particular ecosystems. And we don't have either the basin level evaluation. And destruction of water can affect an area many times bigger than the surface area of the project, because these basins are connected through the underground. So they seem to be isolated, but they're not. And of course, in the surroundings, there are indigenous cultures that depend on these resources, but Pia Matriciani will speak about that later. And so I leave it to her. And with that, there's a landscape modification that will impact on the developing tourism in the area. So what do we propose? It's not all critics. We know that countries are demanding for the lithium for the batteries, so we say that countries share the responsibility for how and where lithium is exploited, to support development and implementation of environmental planning and management tools for minimizing the environmental and social impacts of a project or the combination of projects in a basin or nearby basins. And I mentioned the Ramsar, and you, Teres, mentioned the Ramsar site. We need to avoid areas which are recognized for the importance in international conservation, such as these, and to support research into and innovation for the application of new technologies that will consume less water and thus have a lower impact on the environment. And we need to promote the role of these ecosystems, and we invite you to promote the role of these ecosystems in providing key resources for Andean communities, as well as contributing to climate change adaptation, which is the very beginning of the whole story, isn't it? We are doing this because of the climate change, and we need to adapt, but we are penalizing these very fragile ecosystems because of that. Yeah? So this is it up to now. Thank you very much. We can be in contact at any time. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Roman, for this great presentation, which is very informative, and also, thank you for the awareness raising on those great ecosystems, and also for showing some recommendations we can discuss later when we have the discussion. So also for the audience, don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. We will collect the questions and then we will address them after the presentations. And for the ones participating on YouTube, you can use the commenting instrument, and we will collect them as well. And now I will hand over to Pia Matriciani. She's Environmental Policy Director and Deputy Director at the Foundation Environment and Natural Resources. She's based in Buenos Aires. And Pia has a law degree from the University of Buenos Aires and a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Freiburg in Germany and University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And she has a lot of experience on the impact of lithium extraction on the environment and also in indigenous communities in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, and is about to finalize her doctoral thesis on this topic, as I've learned. Pia, I've been told those days that wetlands provide more than 1 billion livelihoods across the world. I didn't know that, to be honest. They're delivering food, water supplies, transport, and also leisure. And in Argentina, they offer also economic opportunities, especially for indigenous people. And people living near wetlands have developed also like social cultural values around wetlands that are also integral to their culture and spiritual life. So from a human well-being point of view, could you share with us how communities are affected by the extractivist economic model, which is also quite fueled and exacerbated by the consumption models, especially of the global north, that is basically, overshooting planetary boundaries since decades. So the floor is yours. And
thank you. Can you hear me properly? It's good. Okay, I
Yes.
have a short presentation, which is just some pictures. So whoever has never seen how these areas look like or what kind of economic activities are there, get a bit of an idea. So thank you for the space and for the questions, Teresa. And what I want to do in this presentation is share a bit of the economic activities, because people tend to think, oh, these areas, nobody lives there, nobody can live out of the whatever wetlands bring about. So I think it's very important to have a counter narrative that relates to what communities are doing and how they live. Let me know if you see the screen. It's just some pictures, but very shortly saying indigenous communities live there for thousands of years, centuries, and with their Koja and Atacama communities, and they have been doing different activities which relate to their culture, heritage. They learn the different activities from their ancestors, and they pass it over to youth and new generations. Of course, Lithium is generating a challenge in how they're going to keep these activities and the culture that involves all these activities. So first, this is not working. Wait a second. Okay, there you go. So the main activities have to do with agriculture. So you can see here, there's not a lot of water, but there is still agriculture. There's a lot of crops that are being grown also indoor nowadays. They have specific technology to try to get their own vegetables, also from indoor planting. Also livestock, different animals that they use, like llamas, sheep, goat. And they make a living out of this, particularly women. Are in charge of llama brewing, and they have a lot of handicraft and culture around. And this is just a picture of how different wools are produced and how they are colored and woven into handicrafts. Also, salt extraction for home and industrial use. We always think that, oh, nobody of the communities are not using the salt. No, they are, and they make a living out of this, and they're selling it in the market for domestic and for industrial use. Salt is a very important product that comes from the wetlands. And also, as Roman said, tourism. In Argentina, for example, Salinas Grandes was declared the 7th natural wonder in Argentina. We have other natural wonders, but it's a very important tourism site. And what I want to say with this is that there's a way of living and existing, even if people would tend to think the water is not enough or the extreme weather conditions are very difficult. Communities have managed to live there for a long, long time, and they have managed to build also community values around this way of living, and just in a Western way, sustainable, but really sustainable and not greenwash sustainable. And what I want to say with this, when you interview people and you say, what do you like about this place? And they answer very clearly, we are happy here. We're happy like this. And we really want to keep on doing the same things we've been doing, obviously adapting to new things, but we want to keep on living this way. We don't want to be pushed out of our lands, and we don't ask anything out of the state. We can sustain ourselves. But obviously water and the threat to water that lithium brings around has been creating a lot of concern in communities. And now I'm going to move to talking a bit about the human rights, the rights impact and what's been going on. For example, communities in Salinas Grandes in this area have been carrying out a more than a 13-year struggle for the recognition of the basic human rights. So they first started organizing themselves when they first saw a company coming in and trying to make a hold on their land, saying, what's going on? What is this lithium? Like, imagine 13, 14 years ago, this was not such a known topic as we see it today. So communities gathered and organized around, we need to understand what's going on, and already filed the first lawsuit because they were realizing their right to consultation and FPIC rights, free, prior, and informed consent. This is recognized in the Argentinian constitution already for 30 years, with the indigenous rights in the constitutional reform, was not being implemented. And they were not consulted, they were not being considered as right holders. So they started a long struggle for recognition, for participation, which led also to a case in the Inter-American Commission, that this case is still moving very slowly, but it's still there at the international level. And then afterwards, they even went forward to drafting, and here is a different map that the one Roman shared, where Salinas Grandes have, and they have drafted this protocol that is called CATIUPI, the trucks in the salt, and they were setting up the conditions for consultation. In Argentina, we don't have a particular law that says how indigenous communities should be consulted, but the right is there. So communities have the right to be consulted, and this right is essential to their well-being and to their own culture. And they've drafted this protocol on the conditions, how they need to be consulted. And this has to do with adapting the consultation to their particular culture, their own ways. So they drafted this protocol and tried for many years to get government recognition of the protocol. This didn't happen. And then there was a new push for new permits on their land, to the point that they decided to move away from the demand for consultation. And they decided, we don't want to be consulted anymore. We want our self-determination right implies that we don't want to be consulted, and we say no to lithium. We don't want the dialogue, and we already have a decision about lithium, because in all these years we've learned a lot, we've self-organized and learned about the impacts, and we don't want lithium in our land anymore. And this was a position that they had and sustained for a long time. This is around 30 communities living in this watershed that is shared by two provinces, Salta and Jujuy, and they more or less stayed with this position until last year, when there was a new setback of regulations, particularly in the government of Jujuy, where there's two important reforms, one having to do with environmental impact assessment and all the exchanges and consultation that should happen with communities, which is a setback. It's moving the consultation standard even lower than the lack of implementation. And then also a constitutional reform, the whole constitution of Jujuy, that also had a very important setback in terms of the human rights standards. The right to a peaceful protest that was removed, land rights, instead of ensuring that communities have their collective land rights of the titles of the lands where they are living for centuries, instead of giving them the titles, the land was promoted for economic use, and this generates a clash in terms of their land access rights. And then access to justice was also limited. So I'm trying to do it very simple. It has other aspects, but these are the key elements that make a setback in terms of their rights. So we are having rights that need to be implemented at some point. And the last couple of years, setbacks in regulation. We are seeing these now also with the new administration in Argentina, with Milei's government. There's also a very strong push to remove environmental regulation and standards and indigenous rights standards because of investments. This is the main argument. We need to remove obstacles, but we really think it's important when you look at regulation and how permits are being granted in Argentina to think about integrating all the bodies of law. So if we look at the institutional aspects and which are the main challenges, we see first that there's mining law, environmental law, and indigenous law. This is very common in Argentina, and they should be integrated. So social and human rights and environmental indigenous rights should be integrated into mining permits, but we see exactly the opposite, that mining agencies tend to just look at mining regulation and ignore or implement very superficially environmental and human rights standards. This is one problem. A second problem is that provinces tend to want to implement only their own regulation with the setbacks that I just mentioned. And this is not possible in a federal state where provinces are part of a bigger national entity, political entity. They need to apply national standards, and they also need to apply international standards. And we have here the Escazú Agreement and the 169 ILO Convention, which is very important for Latin America, but other UN declarations and principles. So we see this is also a very important issue. Implementation of rights needs to happen with the best standards, which are already included at national level. So, and another trend that we need to see is a move towards privatization of and self-regulation and self-control of companies. This is something we've seen globally as well. But this involves, for example, having own consultations by the companies already conducting consultation with communities. And this is completely breaching the standard in Escazú Agreement and 169 ILO, where the state needs to devise a channel where participation needs to happen. So it's very, very important that when we look and try to understand why is this not happening, what are the implementation gaps in terms of rights, that we understand that if even companies want to implement human rights, they need the state to step in as well. They cannot overrule and go and take the space of the state in conducting these consultations. I think I'll leave it there for now. I'm trying to time it to the 10 minutes I was asked, but thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Pia. That was very impressive and gave us a great and thorough overview. And I think we can touch base perfectly on this when we start with the discussion. There are already some questions we will address, and you can still keep on asking questions in the chat. And for the last presentation now, I want to introduce Robin Röhls. He has a master's degree in conflict and development studies and is currently working for the European Environmental Bureau, where he coordinates the EU Civil Society Network Raw Materials Coalition. And Robin has been closely following the negotiations of the Critical Raw Materials Act last year. It's a legislative proposal which has been published by the EU Commission in March 2023. So Robin, could you please briefly explain a little bit where the Act currently stands, how this legislation might potentially impact resource-rich non-EU countries, and also about the plans, as far as you know, of the European Union concerning its raw material supply with a specific focus on environmental and social aspects. As in the previous presentations, we have heard a lot about possible negative impacts or challenges due to lithium extraction on the environment and especially on communities living in this area. And how can a legislation from the European Union deteriorate the situation or have a negative impact on the situation of vulnerable ecosystems and communities, especially indigenous peoples? The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. Just indeed to give some context a bit on indeed what's been happening in Brussels and on the EU level with regards to indeed as discussed here, raw material supply. So about last year in March, the European Union kicked off the process to create the Critical Raw Materials Act. which has been finalized in almost less than a year. So it has been really a fast process. And this has been mostly instigated by the fact that there were initiatives also in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act. And there was more kind of a sense of risk around supply chains, especially when it comes to our dependence on Chinese raw materials and rare earth elements also specifically. But then also when it comes to energy provision, of course, the war in Ukraine and Russia played a major role also in fossil fuel supply, which the EU grasped as an opportunity to push further its agenda for decarbonization within the context of the European Green Deal. Future demand projections have been made already for some years, but a recent study by the JRC also showed, in particular for lithium, the extreme increase of the demand for mainly electric mobility. And as Roman also mentioned earlier, yeah, there's a lot of numbers going around, but some even in say 40 times as much. So the EU really wanted to focus on, okay, what are the ways that we can kind of meet these demands, but also mitigate any risks when it comes to the supply chains. And for that, it actually worked in two main branches. On one hand, the internal kind of solutions and the internal market of raw materials to boost raw material extraction within the European Union, to also integrate supply chains. Think, for example, the battery supply chain in the Nordics, in Germany, has been high on the agenda. And then on the other side, of course, the external dimensions. So diversifying away raw material supply from China towards other countries, other resource-rich countries, and establishing partnerships with them, which the EU has already been doing, actually also preceding the Critical Raw Materials Act. So when it comes to the region in Latin America, so there's already the partnership memorandum of understanding with Chile, and there's also the Argentina letter of intent that has already given like context to this, also within the context of the Global Gateway. So these are partnerships that are not just only about raw materials, but also a wider set of industries and market collaboration. The EU has also recently launched a raw materials diplomacy website, of which I will gladly share the link after the presentation in the chat. So these are some of the things that they have been doing with the Critical Raw Materials Regulation. And with the Raw Materials Coalition, we have been following this, the creation of this law very closely, engaged with policymakers around these topics and around especially our concerns for the supply, especially when it comes to how they are perceiving the strategic projects and what these encompass in terms of mainly the intent being speeding up the process and quote unquote cutting red tape has been one of our primary concerns. So in the context of rising demand, we have envisioned some of our key policy objectives, of which the main and the top one would be to see how within the European Union we can mitigate our demand for critical raw materials as the most obvious and the lowest hanging fruit way of kind of mitigating criticality would be to see, okay, what are ways in terms of circularity, in terms of raw material consumption reduction, ways that we can reduce our independence, but also release pressure from resource-rich countries which are being targeted for raw materials exploitation. So we even talked about targets towards 2030, 10% towards 2050, 65, what would be needed in terms of kind of a global justice perspective of what is our fair share here within the EU of raw materials to consume, but also as a matter of staying and remaining within planetary boundaries, both on the climate and an environmental dimension. We have also looked at what was being proposed in terms of certification and industry schemes, where there was some worrying language about them replacing existing environmental and social safeguards that we have really pushed through, and now they might proceed to have a bigger role, but they do not replace, luckily, any particular legislation. We've also, of course, within these external dimensions, focused more on a global just as approach, also talk to civil society organizations in those countries to find out what should be included when we see these in strategic partnerships. Even though, of course, the process for the Critical Raw Materials Act was quite transparent when it comes to these partnership agreements, there's often a bit of a lack of transparency, as these are discussions that go between government delegations and are often kept under wraps even after they are being signed. So this lack of transparency is something that we really wanted to address, as well as the language that we see within the Critical Raw Materials Regulation around value addition and what this would encompass. We saw some opportunities there to kind of also start off this dialogue. What is value addition, and how should it be envisioned and also carried out during the implementation phase of the Critical Raw Materials Act. When it comes to protection of local communities and indigenous peoples, we have really also pushed for the inclusion of free, prior, and informed consent, ILO 169, which unfortunately was not fully passed, but we do have the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that is clearly mentioned, and cross-referencing also indigenous rights and concerns within the context of strategic partnerships and strategic projects. And then, of course, as mentioned before, recycling capacity targets are also playing a major role within this context. So now we find ourselves within the implementation phase of the Critical Raw Materials Act, which concretely means that they will be following up with these strategic partnerships, also through the formalization of two new bodies. One is the Critical Raw Materials Board, which will be looking over the assessments for these strategic projects, where we as a coalition will be monitoring, so which projects are being looked at, what would be the ramifications, what are any possible objections, also reaching out to civil society organizations and communities on site to hear their concerns, as we will also have observer status within this Critical Raw Materials Board as civil society. And then there's also the Critical Raw Materials Club, where the EU tries to bring partner countries to the table to discuss raw materials policy in a more broader, more diplomatic context. And this is also something that we will be monitoring to see, what is being discussed there, and making sure that environmental and social concerns, as the ones that we've seen also in the previous presentations, remain on the table, which can sometimes be a bit challenging, but it is something that we believe is also very important. Other than that, we'll also continue our work with being in contact with civil society organizations on the ground, just on a more regular basis, to keep them informed indeed of what the EU is planning in terms of what projects are on the table, what's happening in Brussels. And I think that's about it. We can expect the law to be voted upon as a formality, but soon, within May and June, and then to be put into law as just after the elections here in the EU, somewhere in June. So now is really the implementation, where we will see the EU push for projects to go through faster, more efficiently. But it's very important for us to play a major role in safeguarding social and environmental protection within this context. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin, for giving us the insights on the developments on EU policies on the raw materials. This is quite interesting. And before we start the Q&A session now from the audience, I have one last question to Pia, as we have heard now from Robin about the plans of the EU concerning securing its own access for raw materials. So what do you expect from policymakers, let's say, from EU, but also on national or on regional level? Maybe you can give us some insights on that.
Well, thank you, Teresa, for the question. I think it's very good that I'm answering this after Robin spoke. I think we're very much aligned with the demands from the civil society in Europe, and very shortly trying to say at the global level, we really need to think within the planetary boundaries. Consumerism needs to be addressed. and the demand and extreme demand of resources is a very important pressure for countries in the global south, and also relating to this, the financial issues. Countries in the global south like Argentina are with high foreign debt, and they are just focusing on the short-term planning of extracting as quick and as much as possible. And I think financing for energy transition within the global south is very important, but also discussing the economic overall landscape, debt, and many issues that are very important for the global south. But also, I would say this is not an excuse for the countries in the south to really push for environmental planning in each of their decisions to move away from fossil fuels. We see at the same time that Argentina, for example, is expanding the fossil fuel frontier with fracking, but also offshore deposits. So we really need to see as the importance of the relationship between the North and the South. And for Europe, I would say also the challenge is to detach itself from the competition, to close the gap with China and the security agenda. Is this that important and the only driving force, or is there any other cooperation possible with the global south? And here is where we think that strategic partnerships and all the implementation of this regulation is going to be key in ensuring also that the global south countries have another possible cooperation that is way beyond neo-colonial practices, but really trying to focus on what the countries need: finances, added value, and other issues. Also, I think it's important to push for environmental planning and really think about, if lithium is to be extracted, what are the conditions and the limits? For example, if communities are saying no to lithium, you cannot be pushing for extracting with the force of the police. And I think here Europe has an important role to play due to the democratic commitments and human rights commitments. It's very important that this is sustained. And also the environmental planning tools for the global south would lead, for example, to avoid having 8 different projects in the same watershed as we have in one of the areas. 8 different companies that want to extract water from the same area. This is completely no-go at any cost. And then when we look at the on the ground, the local, what's going on, to respect and fulfill human rights is a basic social contract for democracies, at least in the global south, in Argentina. So it's very important to respect the no of the community, which generally is not a no, it's a no to mining, but it's a yes to life, it's a yes to some other alternative ways of living. And in this point, it's very also important to be careful with self-regulation and industry schemes that tend to override the role of the state. We know the state is not very efficient in many issues, but we cannot leave the wolf, I would say, to control the sheep. We need some neutral authority to be able to control and check the environmental impact studies made by companies and the way companies and communities interact, because we need to make sure that certain standards and conditions are there in those dialogues. When companies and communities close the door in dialogue, we are not sure what's going on, what's being offered in exchange, and if that is exceeding the kind of exchange that should happen. So I think it's also very important to see how, from the industry side, the governments in the EU, in the global south, we boost the capacity of the state to play a role in the implementation of human rights, and not just say, because they're not so good at implementing human rights, just let's get rid of it, just let the company come in and do it. I think this is a very high concern also regarding the European regulation. We need to make sure certain standards are respected, and we have communities living in very challenging conditions. Also, we have poverty and a 40% in Argentina. So we need to make sure inequality is not being reinforced by not having a neutral broker to understand and to mediate in how these decisions are being made. I think I'll leave it there. I also went to the local level. I don't know if that was asked or not, but I think we are very much in line with what civil society is also demanding from the European authorities and the European states on their own as well.
Thanks so much, Pia. That was really interesting and helpful. And yeah, I mean, the aspect, especially what Robin also mentioned in you now about the self-regulation and industry schemes that we see, unfortunately, in many European legislations, this push for giving the responsibility to a third, to auditors and industry schemes is not a way that we wish things go. Now I would say we check the questions from the chat. So Roman, you have already answered one question in the chat. That's amazing. And I had another question for you. Which was, I think you mentioned this also in your here now in the chat, like the baseline of the water levels. And so for me, the question would be like, what, who has to do all the baseline studies? Is this regulated in Argentinian, like national law or on province level? And who has to be held accountable for this? And also environmental impact assessments have been mentioned. So maybe you can just explain a little bit how this works and who is accountable for this.
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, I was anxious to answer that, but I think it's better to maybe explain a little bit better. The companies are the ones that need to carry on this research, but this is in relationship what Pia just mentioned. You cannot allow the company to be the one who's taking care of the environment, because it's the one which is causing the problem at the same time. So the government has to say in there. And I had mentioned that the environmental regulation does not have a proper rule on how to evaluate this particular environment. It's a very old law. The mining industry, it's supported by 100 years old law. So this needs to be adapted to this very different kind of industry of mega water. Mega extraction of water. So we don't have enough baselines for this environment. That's in general, in all these areas, the lack of information is one of the problems. And also the companies may have a very reduced area of measuring the water levels, and might not be enough to detect the impacts on nearby wetlands and connected basins, which are connected through the underground. So it is very hard to detect. I think that answers in part, but you will tell.
Thanks a lot. I have another question from the audience about, I think, Pia, you have been speaking a little bit about this. Social protests and several court rulings related to lithium extraction are currently going on in Argentina. Can you briefly comment on this? And then maybe also, to what extent do you believe modifying current mining policies can improve practices and possibly fund other indigenous communities' restoration or climate adaptation programs nationwide? And how do you think international organizations could help? So maybe if you want, if it's clear, I'm not sure, maybe you can comment like on the social protests and the mining policies. That would be great.
Yes. So one thing we're seeing now is an opposite trend. Instead of improving and enforcing existing standards, there's a setback, a move to really lower standards, not only at the provincial level, but also at the national level, with the new administration that wants to particularly allow mining in glacier protected areas. This is something that has been a regulation that has been passed in Argentina for the last 14 years, and now the new government and the administration wants to change that regulation. So we think that the regulation of mining activities, instead of ensuring environmental and human rights standards, it's moving on the opposite direction to less standards and to ensuring and enabling as fast as possible investment and permit. So this is a bit of a tendency. And basically, many of these situations are kind of resolved in the judiciary system. And this is why there's lawsuits in different areas of the country that try to ensure the implementation of rights. And in many cases, the Supreme Court is intervening to say, this is an environmental standard, this is constitutional, these are the human rights, and it's explaining how human rights and environmental standards should be implemented. We don't know exactly what's going to happen now with all the open lawsuits there's at the Supreme Court level, at the Supreme Court of Jujuy, in Catamarca. There's conflicts, and this is also something that needs to be explained to the investor as well, because the investor thinks because the government is saying that the permit is granted, that's the end of the story. And it's really not, because the way and the conditions in which the process was done had breachings of regulation. And then it might be that a company is super happy because it achieved the permit very, very in a fast track. But then in the end, this is stopped by a court and by protest. And then this is also very important that consent and agreement around extraction is really happening in the right way, effectively happening with dialogues that are meaningful and certain conditions. So I don't know what's going to happen with all of the cases, but I see that this is increasing the conflicts at the court level, at the different levels of the court. So the judiciary system will have to play a role. And also regarding environmental regulation, there's a principle of no regression and a progressive integration of regulation. So there's also at the international level a principle that says we should not be doing these setbacks. If we are protecting ecosystem, we should go every time further. And also, these wetlands have the capacity to capture carbon dioxide and release oxygen. And this is something that needs to be brought into the narrative of what are we investing in, at some point destroying the ecosystems that are provided with the systems that we want to solve the climate crisis. This is completely contradictory. But I would say, obviously, the private sector has a lot to do in terms of improving practices, but also, and this is my strong point, bringing in the state. We cannot get rid of the state, even if it's not so good at implementation. We need the state to be regulating and to be helping out with these issues. For example, even if companies would produce an environmental impact assessment, they wouldn't have the amount of water extracted by other companies in the same ecosystem. So if you don't have a neutral actor that holds the whole, what Roman was talking, the baseline study, the whole water table of that system, even then the company would do something that is not enough. So you need a public interest to be ensuring the way this is happening and extraction is happening. And just the last point, there are communities that might want extraction in their lands, and then the discussion on how much they should benefit, what are the resources. But I think we should be careful in not pushing that benefit discussion and trying to distribute revenues before ensuring that the communities have a respected process where they know what's going to come and they have brought or consented that activity with all the human rights standards. Because we know a lot of cases of corruptions, of offerings, of indoor practices that are really not transparent. So it's important that if benefits are to be distributed, then that benefits can happen, but the rights or the human rights basic implementation is not a benefit that should be negotiated with a company. No, this should be granted. And then on top, if some conditions happen and if they have really consented, then we can discuss about funding and other issues. I think somebody was asking about that as well. I think I leave it there. Obviously, if there's more questions, then we have the contact there. That's not too easy to explain very shortly and to share.
Thank you, Pia. I think that was quite thorough and clear. I have another question. Can any speaker give a sense of the scale of lithium export revenues for the economies of Argentina and Chile? Is it basically a tiny sector that could be dropped or comparable to some agricultural product exports? Does it contribute through royalties to government budgets in any significant way? Romano Pio wants to answer.
I may want to share for a minute this picture with you. It will be just a sec for you to see the importance of mining in comparison to the rest of the industry. In green, you have mining, the second group. In green is the last period, and you can compare it with the agro industry on the very far left. So it's a very tiny income to the country for the moment, but I would say that for the provinces that have lithium, and because they don't have such a big production in terms of agriculture, it is a big income in terms of the revenues of many activities they have. Lithium mining, it's important. So you have to have that in perspective. It's not only for the country, but for the provinces which are independent. I think that changes the course of the activities in each of the provinces. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it was Ned. Yeah.
If not, let us know. And there was one other question for you, directly for you, Roman. How to strike a balance between mining and respect for ecosystems? Are there any good examples or good practices?
First, I have to say I'm not a physicist or a chemist, but there are examples in other industries of different technologies from the one which is the main one in use of these evaporation pools. But first, as Pia said, first the communities need to agree if they want someone to be in their territories. First, we need to see if the environment will not be harmed with these alternative technologies, such as direct extraction, insert the water into the underground. But it has to be proved. It has to be used in experimental, more than experimental, on pilot studies, and see if that doesn't cause an impact. And of course, never in protected areas. That's a no-go. So yes, we might have researchers and take the petrol industry and see how they solve the uranium industry, see how they solved it. But you have to have the wise advice of people who knows where to do certain things and where not to do certain things first.
Thank you, Roman. Maybe, are there actually coming the questions from the YouTube channel to me, or should I give you the word, Leah or Marius? I was so focused on the chat now.
No, so far so good.
Okay.
Let me know that so far there have been no questions on YouTube.
Okay, perfect. Maybe Robin, maybe you can, as far as we know, like there is a strategic partnership planned between the European Union and Argentina. They signed a memorandum of understanding. Do you have any information on that? Is there already a roadmap accessible, or do you have some intel on this, or is it quite untransparent and we didn't hear anything?
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, indeed, the process is actually quite intransparent. So the information that we currently have from the EU and from the Commission is the one that also was shared through the link. I mean, when it comes to these kind of processes, there's actually like a procedure also to request access to document and information through the European Union, because these things should be more transparent. We have filed a couple of those, but we have till now not gotten any positive response. And then the ones that came previously often are sent out very, very redacted. So I think when it comes to in the context of these partnerships, and the light goes out again, there's always the issue that, or the perceived issue that when it comes to what is going to be in there, the negotiations, they do not want to share these matters publicly because it could jeopardize or kind of shift the balance within these negotiations, as being kind of a justification that we hear often from them. But as of now, for the EU Argentina partnership, we do not have any further information. What does happen, and so a lot of, for example, the EIB is also part of this, and there are expert groups that the European Commission organizes, but that is more to gather information beforehand, before really delving into these the forging of these partnerships and these roadmaps, where they invite stakeholders, and by stakeholders, unfortunately, it often also mostly encompasses mining companies and also downstream supply chain companies that are interested in these particular markets, to give their input on these partnerships and what they should encompass. But we also sometimes gather some information through that, but it's more about what other stakeholders want out of the process than the Commission really giving excessive insight, at least not so excessive insight as to what is going to be in there. Sorry, I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but at least for now, that is the case.
Thanks a lot, Robin. And we have another question for you now in the chat. How is the EU ensuring that regulations in Argentina or in other third countries are actually sound? For example, mining code is from the late 1800s. Little to no royalties are left in Argentina in mining projects, among other issues.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. I see that my colleague Diego has also been active in the chat as we speak. So yeah, when it comes to to these kind of provisions, indeed, they are very weak from the side of the Critical Raw Materials Act. There is, of course, also the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, where these matters are more the focus of the discussion. Like, indeed, how can you ensure this through due diligence provision, also to pressure countries indeed into abiding by by certain legislation. I think indeed it was also mentioned before, it should be in the interest of the EU to pressure, for example, countries that have signed the Escazú agreement to abide by that, as we also have our own version here within the European Union, within Europe. Sorry, rather correctly, is the Aarhus Convention. So like to push on these mechanisms is very important. And of course, existing international instruments. When it comes to national legislation within the context of Argentina, of course, the EU can't really push that as much as it would, of course, things that are common between the two entities. So yeah, when it comes to outdated or very old mining legislation, I guess indeed this can cause issues for sure. But again, with some slight optimism, I think we can say that there is some language, at least, also again in for local communities, indigenous peoples within the context of the CRMA, that could provide some leverage for interest groups and for civil society organizations to pressure the EU to also address the Argentinian government within this context. But we have to know that we're kind of a bit less on rigid ground when it comes to these things. So that it's really also up to us to push for this, as the EU will probably not reprimand Argentina for not abiding necessarily by its own regulations.
Thank you, Robin. And I'll allow myself a small comment that often the legislations are quite sound in there. It's about implementation, right? I mean, you see that everywhere, also on German and European level. And then we have another question again for Roman or Pia, related to a question before: are there battery manufacturers that have plans to build factories in Argentina? I know Diego, Chile is looking to move up the value chain. Is the same argument occurring in Argentina, or is it really just about a primary lithium extraction to be processed in other countries? As yeah, maybe who wants to have the floor?
No, just very shortly, I want to comment that there has been, I would say, announcements, and even like, for example, Chinese companies that wanted to build electric buses or public transports in Argentina. They've been announcing this and planning for a number of years, but in the end, they moved to Brazil. So plans are there. Also, there's like national-led companies that are trying to have pilot plans to build some batteries, but we don't see any progress on those. There's announcements, some plans, and now we go into a new administration phase where these companies that needed or could depend on public support from the state and the budget, the national budgets, are moving away because the whole economic model had changed to the regulation. So it's probably not going to happen very soon. And also that the announcements in the end didn't really progress. I don't know if you have more information on that end, Roman.
No, I agree that there are intentions and announcements, but it won't change the facts that we previously talked about, because for that you need to change the methodologies, you need to respect the communities, and we don't see that first. And I wanted to bring just a thing that is related to the batteries, which is lithium means only, say, 10% of what it is needed to replace the fleet of petrol and diesel vehicles. So we need to think with a wider view here. It will not save us just to think of lithium being extracted everywhere and producing all the needed batteries from lithium. It's not the answer. We need to start changing the technology. We agree on that. We know we need to go away from the petrol dependent energy, but we need to think ahead on how to do it properly.
Thanks to both of you. Then we have maybe a quicker question. Which are the main EU players involved in Argentina and Chile? I suppose in the mining sector, right?
I know there's Lilac. That's one big company from the United States already working in Argentina, but I'm sorry, I don't have the details. Oh, sorry, that's from the United States. I read it wrongly. So, Pia, I don't know if you have one answer. Maybe just Rio Tinto. It's already in Salta province, already establishing themselves. That's one of the big ones.
Yeah, I would say mainly they are North American, Australian, and Chinese, but there are some European players, and also the automobile companies now buying from, for example, US suppliers. So there's also in discussing the value chain and seeing who's buying from whom and what is the whole pieces. There's European companies more in the end of the automobile companies buying and from Argentina. But the mining sector is mainly occupied by other players. not exclusively, but mainly, I would say.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on this, BMW, for example, is a direct buyer from Livent, I think, in Argentina. They're buying lithium from there because they are trying to shorten their value chains. This has also to do with the German Supply Chain Act. I think they already planned this before, but yeah, they want to have more control over their value chains and shorten them in order to have more transparency, as far as I know. And there we have other ones. I don't know if there are any more questions I haven't seen. Marius, please help me, or from YouTube.
I think most of them are covered. Just maybe perhaps the one I think that got raised very early on that was partially answered by Roman, but which may be worth just revisiting for a second. Because I thought it was very interesting. It's about the water tables and the water reserves. So it basically will they continue to run dry, or can the lithium extraction process be sustained, and for how long? And I think, Roman, you mentioned something about there's only so much water that basically makes its way back into the reserves. And perhaps can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Marius. Yes, what we know is that most of these basins have what we call fossil water, which is water that has been accumulating for more than 50 years, 100 years or more, due to previous water ages. And when you extract the water to pump it out, you are doing it much faster than the rate of the accumulation of this fossil water. In any case, when you extract water very fast, you will have a depression of the water level, and you will have an impact on the vegetation that it is, as we said before, nurtured from the underground humidity. So that's why we cannot say this can be sustainable. Maybe there's one case where you have a inserts of water that can be more or less in balance with the extraction, but let's say that's not the general rule, because these are very, very dry areas, and they're closed basins. Thank you.
Thanks. And I might have one more question from before. Should I go ahead and pose it? Teresa?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, because there was a question about the social protests, and that we touched upon very briefly, but I think it might be interesting also for the audience to know about it. I guess this will be a question for you, Pia, about the protests in Jujuy last year and the march and everything. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how that developed and what the status is right now of those protests, also in Buenos Aires itself, of course.
So just very shortly, when the constitutional reform happened, it just to give more information, it had a process and a time frame that was very short to reform certain aspects of the Jujuy constitution. And in the end, what happened was that process and that timing was not even implemented, because it was done even faster than self-claimed by the government. Sorry if I have background noise. So this made people started protest, and the protest became very violent in terms of security forces repressing all protests, and people wanting information, wanting to get rid of the constitution, to push it back, that reform. So the Malón de la Paz was formed, which is was a group of indigenous communities. It's called the Third Malón de la Paz because it happened for the third time in history, with all the groups of indigenous communities in Jujuy went all the way to Buenos Aires to demand for the rights, and they stayed and were camping before the Supreme Court of Justice for 4 months, and they had meetings with the president, and they filed different lawsuits. Then the government and the administration changed, and now the communities went back to Jujuy, and they're still working on the legal front of this discussion. But there is a lot of insatisfaction in terms of indigenous rights in the whole province of Jujuy. Lithium extraction represents some of the communities, but there's also other mining and other economic activities that communities are opposing, and basically because their rights are not recognized, the land rights and the participation rights. So protests now are a bit calmer. That's not like we had like 4 months of protests very strong. This is a bit calm now, but there could be any sparkle once again, because the main topic has not changed. The request for rights and to change the constitution that was unlegitimately reformed without participation of communities in that reform is still something that can sparkle more conflict in any time when a new project comes in, or when there's certain other situations. So it's not really solved. Also, the administration in Jujuy changed, but the actual governor is very linked to the previous governor. So it's a lot of a connection on the policies implemented. So now a bit of calm, but doesn't mean that the conflict is over, and the legal fronts are going on at the Supreme Court of Jujuy and others. I don't know each of the legal cases that were filed. And also the government of Jujuy, just to mention, for example, a completely different case, that a person that was making some kind of joke with Twitter is now in prison for 60 days, which is very strong consequence for just tweeting, whatever, which was really not it was a kind of a joke and really not very much politicized. But this is showing that there's a bit of a stronger positioning of the government regarding freedom of expression, protest, and this might lead to more conflicts coming. Also regarding extraction and lithium in the salt flats, where the communities are not opposing, there might be also conflicts soon, I think. But thank you for this. It's difficult to know what's going to happen, but at least it's a bit calm. But these reactions of the government, of somebody tweeting and being in prison for 60 days, this is even extreme for Argentina and for Jujuy, and we don't want to see this kind of the closing of the civic space and the rule of law in Argentina. But thank you, Marius.
Thank you, Pia, for explaining. And yeah, it really shows like the tense situation actually. And so I don't know if we have more questions. I don't see any in the chat, but Marius, do you have more questions from the chat or yourself?
No, I think we covered pretty much all of them.
Great. Yeah, so I can just say thank you to everyone. I think we have been talking about a lot of topics, and yeah, especially about the role of and also responsibility, right, of companies, especially of investors, the governments, and also the high pressure that the environment and communities living in the high Andean wetlands are feeling due to our consumption models basically, and also our business models. So thank you all, especially of course the ones who made this great inputs and Q&A session. So Pia, Roman and Robin, thanks a lot. And also special thanks to Lea Pulo from Wetlands International Europe, who was mainly organizing together with Marius Trost from both ends. So thank you. And thanks also to the audience for the great questions and interaction. And I think the topic will keep being very important. So I think we'll stay in touch on this. Have a nice day. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye.